Michael Grant thought he had it all: wealth, power, and success. But when a chance encounter with his first love, Emily, reveals the life and the son he left behind, his world is turned upside down. Determined to make amends, Michael steps into Emily's world, where he'll have to earn back her trust and face the fallout of his past choices. As he fights for a second chance, he'll confront long-buried secrets, new family bonds, and the true meaning of success. Will Michael rebuild the family he never knew he needed, or will his old life tear it all apart? If you're ready for a story of redemption, family, and the power of second chances, hit subscribe and join us on this journey. Don't forget to like and comment. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Let's dive in. The rhythmic sound of rain hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows should have been soothing, but to Michael Grant, it was just another reminder of his restless mind. Seated in his penthouse office on the 48th floor of one of Manhattan's gleaming skyscrapers, Michael stared out at the darkened skyline, illuminated only by the scattered lights of the city and the occasional flash of lightning. The world below looked so small, so distant, almost as distant as his memories of the life he'd left behind. On his desk lay a freshly signed contract, the ink barely dry. It was a deal worth $50 million, a feat that would secure his position as one of the most influential investment leaders in New York. Yet, as he studied the contract, the familiar rush of satisfaction failed to come. Instead, there was an unsettling emptiness that he couldn't quite name. Michael ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, catching a glimpse of his own reflection in the window. There, staring back at him, was the image of a man who seemed to have everything: a meticulously tailored suit, a luxury office, and a career that others could only dream of. But tonight, even with the promise of wealth and prestige within arm's reach, he felt more like a ghost inhabiting someone else's life. He tried to focus, tried to shake off the strange feelings by telling himself he had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. He had conquered Wall Street, built an empire, and made a name for himself. Yet something about tonight, the storm, the flickering city lights, the vast emptiness of his office, made it impossible to ignore the hollow ache in his chest. A memory drifted to the surface, unbidden, the sound of laughter, bright and carefree, echoing across a college campus. The memory was faded around the edges, like an old photograph left out in the sun, but the emotions it stirred were clear as day. He could almost see her face, her wide smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. Emily. Michael hadn't thought about her in years. At least, that's what he told himself. But the truth was, Emily Carter had never really left his thoughts, not completely. She had been his first love, the one person who had believed in him back when he was just a young man with big dreams and no direction. She had been there during those early days, standing by his side, encouraging him, loving him until he had chosen ambition over love. A voice came through the intercom, pulling him back to the present. "Mr. Grant, your car is ready," announced Regina, his executive assistant. Michael hesitated, then pressed the button on his desk. "Thank you, Regina," he replied. "But I think I'll be driving myself tonight." There was a brief silence, and then her voice crackled back. "In this weather, sir?" "Yes," he said, his tone final. "Good night, Regina." He grabbed his coat, throwing it over his shoulders as he made his way to the elevator. Once inside, he pressed the button for the basement garage, watching his reflection in the mirrored walls as the elevator descended. He was 40 now, with not a single strand of gray in his dark brown hair, and an athletic build he maintained through rigid workout routines. By all appearances, he was the epitome of the Wall Street titan, a man at the peak of his career. But as he stared into his own eyes, he saw something else, an emptiness, a restlessness that seemed to stretch deeper with each passing year. The doors opened with a soft chime, and Michael strode through the parking garage toward his car, a sleek Aston Martin, polished to a mirror-like finish. He slid behind the wheel, the familiar scent of leather and luxury enveloping him. Yet tonight, even the comfort of his prized car couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As he drove out of the garage, the rain poured down in thick sheets, blurring the city lights and turning them into streaks of color against the dark canvas of the night. He found himself driving without a destination, letting the car carry him wherever his thoughts led. And before he realized it, he was headed toward a part of the city he hadn't visited in years. The streets were nearly deserted as Michael's car navigated through Brooklyn. He hadn't planned to come here, hadn't even thought of this neighborhood since he left it behind years ago. But something about tonight had pulled him back to this place, as if he were searching for something he couldn't name. As he turned onto a quiet street lined with modest apartment buildings, a flash of movement caught his eye. Near a dimly lit bus stop, he saw a woman huddling under a tattered umbrella, her arms wrapped protectively around two small children. They were drenched, their clothes soaked through, and the woman was struggling to shield the kids from the harsh wind and rain. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he recognized her. It was Emily. His foot hit the brake, bringing the car to an abrupt stop. He stared, his heart pounding as he took in the sight of her. The way her hair clung to her face in the rain, her shoulders hunched in a protective stance over the children. She looked different, older, more worn, but there was no mistaking her. In a daze, he rolled down the window, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. "Emily." She turned, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, as if time had folded in on itself, bringing them back to a moment long past. But then her gaze hardened, and she pulled the children closer to her, a protective instinct flashing across her face. "Need a ride?" Michael asked, his voice as steady as he could manage, though his hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Emily hesitated, her gaze flicking between him and the children. She looked wary, her shoulders tense, as if she were ready to bolt at any moment. But the rain was relentless, and her young son, no older than 5, was shivering, his small body pressed against her leg for warmth. "We're fine," she replied, her voice laced with steel. But her son tugged at her coat, his voice a small, shivering whisper. "Mommy, I'm cold." The sound of the boy's voice broke something in Michael. He leaned over, opening the passenger door. "Please, Emily," he said softer this time. "Just let me help, for the kids' sake." For a long, tense moment, she remained still, her gaze locked on his, a storm of emotions flashing in her eyes. Then, with a reluctant sigh, she guided the children toward the car, helping them into the back seat before sliding into the passenger seat herself. As they drove in silence, Michael found himself glancing at the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting the boy's wide, curious gaze. There was something hauntingly familiar in those eyes, a shade of blue-gray that he hadn't seen in years. A chill ran through him as he realized it was the same color as his own. The boy leaned close to his mother, whispering something Michael couldn't hear, and Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her other child, a toddler barely 2 years old, nestled in her lap, her small face buried in her mother's coat. When they reached her apartment, a modest building with peeling paint and flickering lights, Emily gathered her children, murmuring a soft thank you before stepping out of the car. She hesitated at the door, turning to face him one last time. "Goodbye, Michael," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. And then she disappeared into the rain-soaked night, leaving him alone with 1,000 questions he couldn't begin to answer. Back in his penthouse, Michael stood by the window, watching the rain as it streaked down the glass. The encounter with Emily had left him shaken in a way he hadn't anticipated. The sight of her, struggling in the rain with 2 young children, had stirred something deep within him, an ache that had been dormant for years. He poured himself a glass of scotch, hoping the burn would clear his mind, but the alcohol only intensified the memories flooding back to him. He could still see her smile, hear her laughter echoing in his mind. She had been his anchor, his heart, and he had thrown it all away for a career that now felt hollow. The image of the boy's eyes haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing, something he hadn't understood. The resemblance was too strong to ignore, too obvious to be a coincidence. Setting his glass down, he pulled out his laptop and opened an old folder he hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos from his college days, snapshots of him and Emily, their faces bright with youthful hope and love. They looked so different back then, so carefree, as if the future held nothing but promise. He paused on a photo of Emily laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling with joy. He had loved her more deeply than he had ever loved anyone, but he had let her go, convincing himself that ambition was more important than love. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound a constant reminder of the night's encounter. He couldn't escape at the feeling of guilt, the realization that he had left something vital behind when he walked away from Emily all those years ago. For the first time in years, Michael felt a deep, consuming regret. He had built his life on power and success, but in the quiet of the night, he knew that none of it could fill the void he had created. As he sat there, surrounded by the hollow trappings of his wealth, he decided he would find Emily again, talk to her, and finally confront the truth he had been running from. The question of the boy's identity lingered in his mind, a question he knew he couldn't ignore. He didn't know if Emily would ever forgive him, but he had to try, for her sake and maybe, just maybe, for his own. 2 days after their encounter, Michael found himself back in Brooklyn, standing outside a small, unassuming cafe with faded green paint and a hand-lettered sign reading Rose's Coffee and Pastry. He'd learned from a quiet inquiry that Emily worked here part-time to make ends meet, balancing her shifts around the needs of her children. The sight of the place, simple, modest, and worlds away from the high-rise office buildings he was used to, stirred something in him. It was a reminder of how different their lives had become. As he pushed open the door, a soft bell chimed, and the warm scent of coffee and baked goods filled the air. The cafe was nearly empty, save for an elderly couple sharing a muffin in the corner and a young man typing away on a laptop by the window. And there, behind the counter, was Emily, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, a faint dusting of flour on her apron. She looked tired but determined, her movements quick and practiced as she took orders and prepared drinks. She spotted him almost immediately, her eyes widening in shock before narrowing into a guarded expression. Michael braced himself as she approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Michael," she said, her voice low and clipped. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed, momentarily thrown by the wall of defensiveness in her gaze. "I wanted to talk," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "Just for a few minutes." "Please, Emily." She hesitated, glancing over at her manager, who nodded, giving her permission to take a break. She led Michael to a small table near the back, far from the other customers, and sat down, crossing her arms. Her posture was tense, her expression wary, as though she were bracing for some unpleasant confrontation. "What do you want, Michael?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You made it clear years ago that we didn't fit into your plans. So why show up now?" He felt a pang of guilt at her words, a reminder of the choices he had made and the impact they'd had on her. "I know I hurt you, Emily. I know I walked away when you needed me, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But seeing you the other night, it made me realize that I can't just pretend you don't exist, that they don't exist." He hesitated, searching her gaze. "Are they my children?" Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, she looked like she might get up and walk away. But instead, she took a deep breath, her jaw tight. "Tommy is yours," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after you left. I tried to tell you, Michael. I called, I emailed, but you were too busy with your career. Eventually, I stopped trying." Michael felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He remembered that time he'd been so consumed by his career, so focused on his ambitions, that he had blocked out everything else. And in doing so, he had missed out on the most important chapter of his life. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice rough with regret. I was selfish, Emily. I thought I knew what I wanted, and I didn't realize what I was giving up. If I'd known, if I'd been there." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "It's too late for that, Michael. You can't go back and undo what's been done. Tommy and Mason, they've grown up without you. They've had to rely on me, and they're my whole world now. You showing up out of nowhere doesn't change that." He nodded, understanding the depth of her resentment. But despite her words, he couldn't ignore the pull. He felt the desire to be part of their lives, to make up for the years he had missed. "I know I don't deserve a place in their lives," he said quietly, "but I'd like to try, just to get to know them, to be there in whatever way I can. Emily studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Finally, she sighed, looking down at her hands. "Tommy, he's been asking about you," she admitted, her voice soft. "After he saw you the other night, he asked if you were his father. He's a smart kid. He's already guessed." Michael's heart clenched at her words, a mixture of pride and regret washing over him. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that you were someone from my past," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Someone who decided that his career was more important than a family." The accusation stung, but he couldn't argue with it. It was the truth, harsh as it was. But he wasn't that person anymore, and he was determined to show her that. "Let me see him," he said, his voice almost pleading. "Let me be there, even if it's just as a friend. I want to know him, Emily, and I want him to know me." She hesitated, clearly torn, before finally nodding. "All right," she said, her voice resigned. "But don't make any promises you can't keep. Tommy has already had to live with enough disappointment. He doesn't need more." Michael nodded, gratitude filling him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "I won't let you down." Michael returned to work the next day, but his mind was far from the contracts and spreadsheets that filled his desk. His encounter with Emily had left him shaken, and the revelation that Tommy was his son weighed heavily on him. He could barely concentrate, his thoughts drifting back to the cafe, to Emily's words, and to the image of his son's curious eyes staring up at him. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he also couldn't ignore the guilt gnawing at him. Determined to understand what had happened to Emily and her family, he began to dig into his company's records, looking through old files and transactions that dated back to the early years of his career. As he scrolled through project after project, his eyes fell on a familiar name, Peter Carter's Cafe. He remembered it vaguely, one of the smaller acquisitions handled by his business partner, Henry Peterson. It had been a tiny operation, a modest cafe that had been absorbed as part of a larger expansion. Michael hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, looking back, he realized that Peter Carter was Emily's late husband. Curious, Michael delved deeper into the details of the acquisition. What he found left him feeling cold. The deal had been ruthless, with tactics that bordered on predatory. Henry had pressured Peter into taking on more debt, effectively trapping him in a financial corner. When the time came to sell, Peter had no choice but to accept an offer that barely covered his outstanding debts. The deal had left him with nothing. Michael sat back, a sense of horror washing over him. He remembered the pride with which he'd reviewed his company's performance during that year, oblivious to the impact of his decisions on the people caught in his path. He had been so focused on profit margins and quarterly gains that he hadn't seen the lives being shattered behind the numbers. Determined to confront the truth, Michael scheduled a meeting with Henry, steeling himself for a confrontation he had long avoided. The following weekend, Michael met Emily and Tommy at a small baseball field in Brooklyn. It was a modest space, surrounded by tall trees and dotted with patches of grass where children played and families gathered. As he approached, he saw Tommy holding a worn baseball glove, his face lighting up when he spotted Michael. "Hi, Mr. Michael," Tommy called, his voice bright with excitement. "Hey, buddy," Michael replied, smiling as he walked over. He couldn't help but notice the way Tommy's eyes sparkled, the way he looked up at him with unfiltered admiration. It was a look Michael hadn't seen in years, and it filled him with a sense of purpose he couldn't quite explain. "Mom said you'd teach me how to throw like the pros," Tommy said, holding up his glove. "Can you show me?" Michael chuckled, nodding as he crouched down to Tommy's level. "Absolutely. Let's get started." They spent the next hour practicing throws, with Michael showing Tommy how to grip the ball, how to position his feet, and how to follow through with his arm. Tommy listened intently, his gaze focused and determined, and Michael found himself marveling at the boy's focus and determination. It was as if he were seeing a glimpse of his own younger self, filled with dreams and unbridled hope. Emily watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. Michael caught her gaze a few times, but she remained distant, her arms crossed as she observed their interaction. He could sense her reluctance, her uncertainty, but he hoped that she could see the sincerity in his efforts. As the afternoon wore on, Tommy grew tired, flopping down on the grass with a sigh. Michael joined him, sitting down beside him and handing him a bottle of water. "Thanks, Mr. Michael," Tommy said, smiling as he took a sip. "You're a really good coach." Michael felt a swell of pride, though he quickly tamped it down, reminding himself that he still had a long way to go. "I'm glad you think so, Tommy. I'll be here to help you practice whenever you want." Tommy's smile widened, and for a moment he looked as though he might hug Michael. But he held back, glancing over at Emily, as if seeking her approval. Emily gave a small nod, her gaze softening ever so slightly. "You did well, Tommy," she said, her voice warm. "And Mr. Michael, thank you. I know this means a lot to him." Michael nodded, his heart pounding as he met her gaze. "It means a lot to me, too," he said quietly, the weight of his words settling between them. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Michael felt a glimmer of hope, a small but steady feeling that he was finally on the right path, that he was beginning to make amends for the past he had tried so hard to forget. But he knew that there was still more to face, more challenges to overcome, and he was prepared to confront whatever came next. The following week, Michael stopped by Emily's apartment for the first time. It was a modest place on a quiet street, with an old red brick exterior and narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper. As he climbed the stairs, he couldn't help but notice the worn carpet and the dim lighting details that felt worlds away from his Upper East Side penthouse. But somehow, this place felt more alive, more real, than any luxury he'd surrounded himself with. He knocked on the door and waited, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. A moment later, the door opened, and Tommy greeted him with a grin, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Mr. Michael, you're here!" he exclaimed, stepping aside to let him in. Michael smiled, bending down to ruffle the boy's hair. "Hey, buddy, I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Emily appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression a mix of surprise and guarded warmth. "Michael, I wasn't expecting you. I thought I'd drop by and see if you needed any help with the boys," he said, offering her a soft smile. "Maybe I can give you a hand with dinner?" She hesitated, glancing around the small living room where toys were scattered across the floor and a stack of books lay piled on the coffee table. "We don't really do fancy dinners here," she replied, her tone wary. Michael chuckled, feeling oddly relieved by the simplicity. "Good? Neither do I." With a reluctant nod, Emily led him into the kitchen, where a pot of pasta was boiling on the stove. The kitchen was small, with mismatched cabinets and faded linoleum floors, but it was cozy, filled with the warmth of home-cooked meals and laughter. Michael took off his coat, rolling up his sleeves as he joined her at the counter. As they worked side by side, chopping vegetables and stirring sauces, Michael felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in years. The mundane, simple task of cooking with her felt surprisingly intimate, a glimpse into a life he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. He watched as she moved with practiced ease, her focus entirely on the meal, her shoulders relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. "How are the kids doing?" he asked quietly, glancing over at her. Emily paused, her expression softening. "They're good," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "Tommy's been talking about baseball nonstop, thanks to you. He's been practicing every day." Michael smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "He's a natural," he said. "And Mason, he's got that spark, doesn't he? Always curious, always exploring." A faint smile touched her lips, and she nodded. "He does. He's a lot like his dad." Michael felt a pang of regret at the mention of Peter, Emily's late husband. He knew that Peter had been a good man, a loving father, and the kind of partner Emily deserved. But Peter was gone, and Michael couldn't help but hope that there might be a place for him in the family Peter had left behind. As they finished preparing the meal, Tommy and Mason joined them at the table, eagerly digging into their plates. The boys chattered away, sharing stories about their day at school and their friends, their laughter filling the small kitchen. Michael listened, joining in their conversation, savoring each moment of the simple, joyful chaos. By the end of the evening, as he helped clear the dishes, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a sense that perhaps he was finally finding his place. Before he left, Emily walked him to the door, her gaze softened by an emotion he couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly, for being here tonight. It meant a lot to the boys. And to me. He met her gaze, his voice equally soft. It meant a lot to me too, Emily. More than you know. As he left, Michael felt a new resolve settle within him. He would be there for them, no matter what. He would prove to Emily and the boys that he was here to stay. Michael knew he couldn't fully move forward with Emily until he dealt with the remnants of his past, especially the legacy he had helped build with Henry. Determined to hold his former partner accountable, he arranged for a private meeting at the company's boardroom. Henry sat at the head of the long, polished table, his expression smug and relaxed as he glanced over at Michael. "You called this meeting, Michael. Let's hear it. What could be so urgent?" Michael took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "I've gone through the old files, Henry. I know about the deals you made, the predatory tactics, the way you push people into debt to benefit yourself." Henry laughed, leaning back in his chair. "And you didn't benefit from those deals, Michael? Don't act like you're some innocent bystander. You sign off on every one of those acquisitions." Michael's jaw tightened. "I didn't know the extent of what you were doing. I trusted you. But now that I know the truth, I can't stay silent. What you did to Peter Carter, to other families, it's wrong. And it has to end." Henry's expression darkened, his voice a cold whisper. "You're willing to risk everything for a woman you left years ago? For a son you didn't even know existed?" Michael held his ground, his voice steady. "Yes, because this is bigger than just me or my career. This is about doing the right thing." Henry smirked, leaning forward. "If you expose this, you'll be throwing away your entire reputation, your fortune. Do you really want to go down that road?" Michael met his gaze, unflinching. "I'd rather walk away with my integrity intact than stay and watch you destroy more lives." For a moment, there was silence, and then Henry chuckled, a mocking edge to his laughter. "Suit yourself, Michael, but don't expect me to go down quietly." As he left the boardroom, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he had taken the first step toward breaking free from his past. And for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity, a sense that he was finally doing what he should have done years ago. The day of the grand opening of Emily's Bakery was bright and sunny, a perfect start for the little shop they had worked so hard to bring to life. Michael had helped fund the bakery quietly, wanting Emily to feel the accomplishment of creating something that was truly her own. Together, they'd transformed a small, rundown storefront into Sweet Beginnings Bakery, a cozy, welcoming space filled with the scent of fresh bread and pastries. Michael arrived early to help set up, bringing a bouquet of flowers that he placed on the counter as a small surprise for Emily. When she walked in, her eyes widened in delight, and a warm smile spread across her face. "Thank you, Michael," she said, touching the flowers. "This place wouldn't exist without your support." He smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "You did this, Emily. I just gave a little push." As the doors opened, customers began trickling in, neighbors and friends who were eager to support the new bakery. Tommy and Mason were there too, helping hand out samples and greet customers. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their laughter filling the shop as they interacted with everyone who walked in. Michael watched Emily as she worked, moving gracefully between the counter and the kitchen, her face lit with joy. She looked more alive, more vibrant than he had ever seen her, and he felt a swell of happiness knowing he'd played a small part in her success. Near the end of the day, as the crowd thinned, Emily took a break, joining Michael at a small table near the window. She looked out at the street, her expression thoughtful. "This is a dream I thought I'd never achieve," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "There were so many times I wanted to give up, but now it feels like a new beginning." Michael reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You've created something beautiful, Emily, and you did it all on your own." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Not all on my own. I had help, and maybe for the first time, I'm glad I did." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past easing as they looked forward to a future that finally seemed within reach. The night after the bakery's grand opening, Michael received a frantic call from Sophie, his assistant, who had overheard troubling news from Henry's camp. Henry, feeling threatened by Michael's defiance, had begun plotting to sabotage his life, starting with the people Michael cared about most. Michael immediately drove to the bakery, arriving just in time to see a group of vandals scurrying away from the building. They had thrown paint across the windows, splattering the bakery's carefully crafted sign, and left graffiti scrawled on the door. Emily appeared at the doorway, her face pale as she took in the damage. Who would do this? Michael clenched his fists, anger boiling within him. It was Henry's doing. He's trying to intimidate me. Her gaze turned hard, a determination shining in her eyes. I won't let him ruin this. I've worked too hard to let someone like him take it away. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. We won't let him win, Emily. I'll make sure of it. As they stood there, united in the face of adversity, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer the man who had abandoned her for ambition. He was here to stay, to protect her and her family, no matter what it took. A week after the incident at the bakery, Michael joined Emily, Tommy, and Mason at a nearby park for an afternoon picnic. The day was bright and clear, and the park was alive with families, couples, and friends enjoying the crisp autumn air. Michael watched the boys as they ran around, their laughter echoing through the trees, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Emily spread out a checkered blanket on a grassy hill, unpacking a basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies. As she set everything up, Michael caught her glancing at him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. You know, I think the boys are starting to look forward to these outings as much as I am, she said, her voice warm. Michael smiled, taking a seat beside her on the blanket. It's the highlight of my week, too. Spending time with you and the boys, it's something I never thought I'd have, and I don't take it for granted. Emily's gaze lingered on him, and he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. They're so young, she said softly. They need someone they can count on, someone who won't walk away when things get hard. Michael reached over, taking her hand gently in his. I'm here, Emily. I made a mistake once, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm not going anywhere this time. You and the boys are my family now, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect that. She looked down at their hands, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's taken me a long time to believe that someone could choose us, just as we are. But you've shown me that maybe people really can change. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Tommy and Mason chased each other across the field. At one point, Tommy looked over, waving for Michael to join them, his face lit with excitement. Come on, Mr. Michael. Show us how to throw the curveball. Michael chuckled, getting to his feet and jogging over to join the boys. Emily watched them, her expression filled with a mixture of pride and contentment. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where this was her reality, a life filled with love, laughter, and the family she had always dreamed of. A few days later, after an evening spent reading bedtime stories to the boys, Michael lingered in Emily's living room, feeling the warmth of the cozy space. The apartment was small but filled with personal touches, family photos, artwork by the boys, and little reminders of the life Emily had built for them. To him, it felt more like home than any mansion or penthouse ever had. Emily joined him on the couch, her hair loose around her shoulders, a soft smile playing on her lips. They sat together in a comfortable silence, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside. Finally, Michael broke the silence. Emily, I've been wanting to tell you something. I know I've been trying to make things right, to be there for you and the boys, but I also want you to know that this isn't just an apology. I love you, and I want to be with you no matter what the future holds. Her eyes softened, and she looked down, a small smile on her lips. Michael, you've done so much for us already. But love is about more than just being there in the good times. It's about the hard times too, and I need to know that you're ready for that. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple, elegant ring. I am ready. I want to be there for you, for Tommy and Mason, in every way. Emily Carter, will you marry me? Her hand went to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at the ring. She was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. Then, with a soft laugh, she nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her close as a sense of peace washed over him. They had both been through so much, but in this moment, he felt that they had finally found their way back to each other. And this time, he was here to stay. Michael's happiness was soon tested when he received a summons to attend an emergency board meeting at Grant and Peterson. He knew immediately that Henry was behind it. His former partner wasn't the type to let go without a fight. But this time, Michael was prepared. He had evidence of Henry's unethical dealings, and he was ready to present it if necessary. As he entered the boardroom, he found Henry waiting, along with several board members, all of whom wore expressions of discomfort and unease. Henry looked up, a smirk playing on his lips as he gestured for Michael to sit. "Michael," he began smoothly, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "I'm sure you're aware that recent actions have raised some concerns. Concerns about your loyalty to this company." Michael met his gaze without flinching. "And I'm sure you're aware, Henry, that I know about the underhanded tactics you used in the Carter acquisition and others like it. Tactics that are not only unethical, but potentially illegal." Henry's smirk faltered, and a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Michael. You could lose everything." Michael stood, his voice calm but firm. "I'm willing to take that risk, because for the first time in my life, I'm doing what's right, not what's profitable. You might be able to intimidate others, Henry, but not me. Not anymore." He placed a USB drive on the table, filled with evidence of Henry's manipulations. "This is the proof of your actions. If you don't resign from the company, I'll take it public. You can either walk away quietly, or you can go down with it." The room fell silent, and the board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and disapproval. Henry's face turned red with anger, but he knew he was cornered. Finally, with a defeated sneer, he rose from his seat and stormed out of the room, leaving Michael standing victorious. The day of Michael and Emily's wedding was simple yet beautiful. They held the ceremony in the garden behind her bakery, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors who had become like family. The boys played their roles proudly, dressed in small suits, their faces filled with excitement and pride. As Emily walked down the aisle, wearing a simple white dress and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, Michael felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. She looked radiant, her smile bright and full of hope, and as she reached him, he took her hands in his, feeling a profound sense of peace. The ceremony was short and heartfelt, filled with promises of love and loyalty, of family and new beginnings. When they exchanged rings, Michael felt a sense of completion, as though he were finally where he was meant to be. Afterward, they celebrated with their guests, sharing laughter, food, and memories. Tommy and Mason were delighted, running around with the other children, their laughter echoing through the garden. Michael watched them, his heart filled with a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. As the evening wound down, Emily pulled him aside, her eyes filled with love. "Thank you, Michael, for everything, for choosing us, for fighting for us." He held her close, kissing her softly. "You're the reason I finally found myself, Emily. You and the boys, you're my home." 5 years later, life had settled into a joyful routine. The bakery had become a beloved part of the neighborhood, known not just for its pastries, but for the warmth of the people who worked there. Emily had expanded to a second location in Manhattan, and Michael had found a new career working with nonprofits that supported small businesses, a mission that felt deeply personal to him now. Their family had grown as well. Michael and Emily now had a daughter, Lily, who was just learning to walk. The boys, Tommy and Mason, had grown into confident, happy children, thriving in the love and stability of their home. One sunny afternoon, as they gathered at the bakery for a small family celebration, Michael took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He had once been a man consumed by ambition, blinded by success, and yet now, in the simple joy of family and love, he had found a life richer than he had ever imagined. Emily joined him, holding Lily in her arms, her smile radiant as she looked around at the life they had built together. "You've given us a beautiful life, Michael," she said softly. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. No, Emily. You gave me a chance to create this life, and I'll spend the rest of my days making sure it's a life worth living. As they stood together, watching their children laugh and play, Michael knew that he had finally found his true purpose, a purpose built on love, redemption, and the family he had once thought he'd lost forever. A year after his marriage to Emily, Michael stepped into a career he had never expected, working for a community nonprofit dedicated to supporting struggling small businesses. The organization focused on providing financial guidance, legal resources, and advocacy for family-owned businesses in underserved areas. For Michael, it was a meaningful shift from his high-powered career, a path that allowed him to use his skills for a purpose he believed in deeply. On his first day, Michael felt a sense of anticipation that he hadn't experienced in years. The office was modest, located in a building in downtown Brooklyn, with open workspaces and a team that buzzed with energy and purpose. He was greeted by Sarah, the organization's director, a woman with a kind smile and an aura of calm competence. "Michael Grant," she said, shaking his hand warmly. "We're thrilled to have you on board. With your experience, we're going to make a real difference in this community." Michael smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm honored to be here. I've spent most of my career focused on profit, but now I want to focus on people." Sarah's eyes sparkled with understanding. "We're going to be doing a lot of that here." Over the next few months, Michael found himself pouring his heart into his work. He met with small business owners struggling to make ends meet, advised family-run shops that were on the brink of closure, and advocated for policies to protect local entrepreneurs from predatory lenders. Every success, every saved business, filled him with a fulfillment that went far beyond any financial gain. One afternoon, as he reviewed a proposal for a program to support single mothers who ran small businesses, he thought of Emily and her journey. Her strength, her resilience, had inspired him to become the man he was today. Now he could honor that by helping others like her. He picked up his phone and called Emily, a smile tugging at his lips. "Hey, I just wanted to tell you I'm working on something really meaningful today. And it's all because of you." Her laughter, warm and bright, filled the line. "I'm proud of you, Michael. You're making a real difference." A few months later, Michael and Emily sat together in the bleachers of a small neighborhood baseball field, cheering as Tommy prepared for his first official game. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and the excited chatter of parents and children. Tommy stood on the pitcher's mound, his face a mix of focus and excitement. Michael had been practicing with him every weekend, teaching him techniques and helping him build his confidence. Baseball had become their special bond, a way for them to connect and share a passion that went beyond words. As Tommy wound up and threw the first pitch, a perfect strike, Michael and Emily erupted into cheers. Tommy glanced over at them, his grin wide and proud, and Michael felt a surge of pride that went beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Watching his son find joy and confidence in the game they loved filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known was possible. After the game, as they walked home, Tommy looked up at Michael, his eyes filled with admiration. "Thanks for teaching me, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." Michael's heart swelled at the word Dad, and he ruffled Tommy's hair with a smile. "You did it, Tommy. I'm just glad I got to be there to see it." Emily watched them, a soft smile on her lips as she held Mason's hand. Her family was complete, woven together with love, support, and the strength of the second chances they had given each other. On their first wedding anniversary, Michael surprised Emily by closing the bakery early and transforming it into an intimate setting for a private dinner. Soft candlelight filled the room, casting a warm glow over the familiar walls and the tables where they had shared so many memories. He had arranged a simple meal, cooking her favorite dishes with a mix of nervousness and excitement. As Emily walked in, her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth in surprise. "Michael, this is beautiful." He smiled, pulling out a chair for her. "I wanted to do something special, to remind you that every day, I'm grateful for you, for this life we've built together." They sat down, enjoying the meal as they shared memories, laughter, and quiet moments of gratitude. Michael couldn't help but feel amazed by how far they had come from the broken paths they had once walked separately to the solid foundation they had built together. As they finished dessert, Michael took her hand, his expression serious. "Emily, I know I've said it before, but thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." She looked at him, her eyes filled with love. "You've become everything I knew you could be, Michael. And every day, you remind me that forgiveness is worth it, that love is worth it." They shared a tender kiss, sealing a promise that went beyond words, a promise of a lifetime of love, respect, and partnership. 2 years later, Michael and Emily welcomed a new addition to their family, a baby girl named Lily. She had her mother's gentle eyes and her father's curious smile, and from the moment she arrived, she brought a new light into their lives. Tommy and Mason adored her, competing to be the first to make her laugh or to read her a bedtime story. One evening, as they gathered in the living room, with Lily snuggled in Michael's arms and the boys nestled beside them, Emily watched her family with a heart full of gratitude. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she wouldn't change a single moment of it. Michael looked over at her, a soft smile on his lips. "Thank you, Emily, for this life, for our family." She reached over, squeezing his hand. "We did this together, Michael. We're a team." And as they sat together, their family complete, they knew that they had found something rare and beautiful, a love that had been tested, a family that had been built with intention, and a future that was brighter than they had ever dared to imagine. Years later, Michael and Emily found themselves watching their children grow into young adults, each one carrying the values of resilience, compassion, and integrity. Tommy pursued a scholarship to play baseball in college, a dream he had chased since those early days with Michael at the park. Mason became interested in photography, capturing moments of beauty and family memories that filled their home. As they watched their children blossom, Michael and Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had created a legacy, not of wealth or prestige, but of love and kindness. They had taught their children the importance of forgiveness, the value of second chances, and the strength of family bonds. One autumn evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, Michael reached for Emily's hand, holding it tightly. "We've come a long way," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Yes, we have, and every step was worth it." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the love and family they had built together, they knew that they had finally found peace. They had turned their past mistakes into lessons, their regrets into gratitude, and their journey into a legacy that would live on in their children and the generations to come. Their story was one of redemption, of love renewed, and of the enduring power of family. And as they sat together, watching the world around them, they knew that this was the life they had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, laughter, and second chances. 3 years after welcoming their daughter, Lily, Michael and Emily decided to establish a community foundation in honor of Emily's late husband, Peter Carter, and the journey that had brought their family together. Named the Carter Grant Foundation, its mission was to provide grants, mentorship, and resources for aspiring entrepreneurs and small family-run businesses in underserved communities across Brooklyn and beyond. The opening ceremony was held in a converted warehouse downtown, and Michael felt a quiet pride as he looked around at the gathering of supporters, community leaders, and local business owners who had come to celebrate the foundation's launch. As he stood at the podium, flanked by Emily and their children, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that they were giving back to the community that had welcomed them. He took a deep breath, glancing at Emily, who gave him an encouraging nod, and began his speech. "Today is a day of gratitude," he said, his voice strong and clear. "Gratitude for second chances, for resilience, and for the power of community. This foundation represents a commitment to support the dreams of others, those who, like my family, have faced struggles and setbacks, but have the courage to build something beautiful." He paused, glancing down at his children in the front row, their faces lit with pride. "Our journey hasn't been easy, but each challenge, each moment of growth, has led us to this. And I hope that through the Carter Grant Foundation, we can help others find their path forward, just as we found ours." The room erupted in applause, and as Michael stepped down from the podium, he felt Emily's hand slip into his, her eyes filled with pride. "You did wonderfully," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Peter would be so proud of you." Michael swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. He had carried guilt for years, but in that moment, he felt a sense of peace, of feeling that he had finally done right by Peter's memory, by Emily, and by his family. As they mingled with guests, he saw faces filled with hope and gratitude, people who would benefit from the foundation's support. Michael realized that this was the legacy he had always wanted, one built not on wealth or prestige, but on love, integrity, and community. 2 years later, Michael and Emily sat in the crowded bleachers of Tommy's high school gymnasium, waiting anxiously as the graduating class filed in. Tommy, now a tall and confident young man, wore his cap and gown proudly, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on his family. He gave them a small wave, and Michael felt his heart swell with pride. As the ceremony proceeded, Michael found himself reflecting on the years he had spent with Tommy, the baseball practices, the school projects, the countless conversations that had turned a once-distant relationship into a bond stronger than he could have imagined. When Tommy's name was called, Michael and Emily stood, clapping and cheering as he crossed the stage to receive his diploma. He looked up, his face beaming with pride, and Michael felt a tear slip down his cheek, overwhelmed by the journey they had shared. After the ceremony, they gathered outside, taking photos and sharing hugs. Tommy turned to Michael, his expression serious yet filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "For everything. For always being there. For believing in me." Michael pulled him into a tight hug, unable to hide his emotion. "You've made me so proud, Tommy. I'm grateful every day to be your father." As they posed for a family photo, with Tommy holding his diploma proudly, Michael knew that this moment was one of the greatest achievements of his life, a testament to the love and dedication they had built together as a family. As the years went on, Michael continued his work with the foundation and the nonprofit, but he occasionally returned to the corporate world as a consultant for companies looking to implement ethical and community-focused practices. He never stayed long, but each visit reminded him of how far he had come from his previous life. On his last official day in the corporate office, he walked the halls that had once felt like home, passing offices filled with the familiar hum of ambition and drive. He paused by the window, looking out over the New York skyline, and felt a surge of gratitude. He had once believed that this view represented the pinnacle of success, but now he knew that true success lay far beyond these walls. He met with a young associate who had recently joined the company, a young man filled with the same drive and ambition he had once felt. As they discussed the importance of integrity and community in business, Michael felt a sense of closure, a feeling that he was passing on the lessons he had learned to a new generation. When he left the office for the final time, he didn't look back. Instead, he walked toward a future built on love, family, and the principles he had once overlooked. 20 years later, Michael and Emily's home was filled with laughter, the sound of their children and grandchildren filling every corner. The family had grown, and now their children were bringing their own families to celebrate holidays, birthdays, and countless other moments. Tommy was a father himself, raising his own children with the same love and care that he had received. Mason had followed his passion for photography, becoming a successful artist who captured the beauty of family and community in his work. Lily had grown into a kind, compassionate young woman with a deep commitment to helping others. As Michael and Emily watched their family gather around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter, they exchanged a smile. They had come so far, transforming their past struggles into a foundation for a future that would continue long after they were gone. When the family gathered to say grace, Tommy took a moment to speak, his voice filled with emotion. "Mom, Dad, I just want to say thank you for teaching us the value of second chances, for showing us what it means to love unconditionally. We are who we are because of you." Michael felt Emily squeeze his hand, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. They had built something beautiful, something lasting, a family bound not only by blood, but by the shared journey of forgiveness, resilience, and love. As they sat together, surrounded by the legacy they had created, Michael knew that he had found the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in financial success or corporate power, but in the love and connection he shared with his family, the values he had instilled in them, and the life they had built together. And as they laughed, shared stories, and celebrated the bonds that had carried them through their lives, Michael and Emily knew, without a doubt, that they had found their happily ever after. As the evening wound down and the family settled into the quiet warmth of their home, Michael and Emily took a moment to reflect on the life they had built. They had traveled a long, winding path, one filled with mistakes, regrets, and redemptive moments that had shaped them into the people they were today. They had learned that love was not always easy, that it required forgiveness, patience, and the willingness to face hard truths. But they had also learned that love, when nurtured and cherished, was the most powerful force in the world, of force that could rebuild, renew, and transform. And as they watched their family gather for one last hug, Michael and Emily held hands, knowing that their journey had been worth every challenge, every sacrifice, and every hard-won lesson. Because in the end, they had found a life built on love, a life that would continue to inspire, guide, and bring hope to those who came after them. One evening, Michael sat on the porch, watching the stars as the gentle hum of nighttime filled the air. Tommy's eldest son, Daniel, joined him, carrying a cup of hot chocolate. Daniel was about 12, with the same bright, curious gaze that Tommy had had at that age, and he looked up at Michael with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Grandpa," Daniel began, glancing up at the stars. "Dad says you used to be really important in a big company in the city." Michael chuckled, surprised by the question, but pleased that Tommy had shared pieces of his journey with his children. "Yes, I did work in a big company," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "But back then I thought important meant making a lot of money and working in a tall building. I learned later that being important has more to do with the kind of person you are and how you treat the people around you." Daniel looked intrigued, sipping his hot chocolate as he listened intently. "So, what's the most important thing you've learned?" Michael considered the question, smiling as memories of his life's journey washed over him. "The most important thing I've learned, Daniel, is that success isn't about how much money you make or how powerful you are. It's about love, kindness, and being there for the people who need you. It's about family." Daniel nodded, as though storing his grandfather's words away. "I want to be like that too, Grandpa," he said earnestly. "I want to be someone who helps people." Michael felt a wave of pride, pulling his grandson into a gentle hug. "You already are, Daniel. And as long as you remember to put love and kindness first, you'll always be important." As they sat together under the starlit sky, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. He had passed down not just words, but a legacy of values that would guide his family for generations to come. Emily arrived at the bakery early one morning, relishing the quiet solitude of the space before the day began. She moved through the familiar kitchen, surrounded by the scents of fresh bread and cinnamon, feeling a sense of contentment that filled her with gratitude. As she prepared the dough, she thought of the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the challenges she had faced as a young single mother, the sacrifices, and the heartbreak that had once seemed insurmountable. And she remembered Michael, the man who had left her and then returned, transformed by the years and determined to make things right. Their love story had not been easy, but it had been real. Together, they had built a life grounded in forgiveness, understanding, and a commitment to family. And in this bakery, she saw not just a place of business, but a testament to the resilience and hope that had sustained her. Just as she finished kneading the dough, she felt a familiar pair of arms wrap around her from behind. Michael kissed her cheek, his presence warm and steady, and she leaned into him, feeling the comfort of his embrace. "I thought you could use some company," he murmured, smiling as he took in the quiet beauty of the space they had built together. Emily turned to face him, her heart full. "Every time I walk into this bakery, I remember how far we've come. And I'm so grateful, Michael. For you, for our family, for everything." He kissed her softly, their bond stronger than ever. "We built this together, Emily, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." They stood together in the stillness, knowing that the life they had created was a rare and precious gift, one they would cherish for as long as they lived. On a warm summer afternoon, the entire family gathered in the garden behind Emily's bakery for a reunion. The children played on the lawn, chasing each other and laughing, while the adults mingled, sharing stories and reminiscing about past memories. The garden was decorated with strings of lights and garlands of flowers, creating a magical atmosphere that reflected the love and joy filling the air. Michael watched as Tommy and Mason laughed with their wives, both men embodying the values of kindness, resilience, and integrity that he and Emily had worked so hard to instill. Lily, now a young woman, chatted animatedly with her cousins, her laughter ringing out like music. As evening approached, Emily stood and called everyone's attention. She held a glass of lemonade, her gaze warm and full of pride as she looked at each member of their family. "I just want to say how proud I am of each and every one of you," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "Our family is built on love, on second chances, and on the belief that we can always grow and become better. Michael and I are grateful for every one of you for the love you give, the values you carry, and the kindness you share with the world." Michael took her hand, raising his own glass. "To family," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "To the love that binds us and the legacy that will live on through each of you. May we always remember what truly matters." The family raised their glasses in unison, their voices echoing through the garden as they toasted to love, resilience, and the power of second chances. As the night deepened, the garden filled with laughter and music, the family dancing under the stars. Michael and Emily held each other close, swaying to the music as they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, that their family would face its own share of struggles and triumphs. But in that moment, they felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that they had created a legacy of love that would carry on for generations to come. And as they danced together in the moonlight, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Michael and Emily understood that they had found the greatest treasure of all, a life filled with love, a family that cherished them, and a future that held infinite possibilities. The years passed, and as Michael and Emily grew older, their family continued to grow, each new generation carrying forward the values they had built together. They had lived a life filled with second chances, learning that love could be renewed and strengthened through forgiveness, that family could be rebuilt with patience and care. In their later years, Michael and Emily often found themselves reflecting on the path they had traveled, the mistakes, the lessons, and the love that had carried them through. Their story, though imperfect, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of redemption, and to the enduring strength of love. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, they held hands, grateful for every moment they had shared. "Do you think we've left something good behind?" Michael asked, his voice soft, a smile on his face. Emily squeezed his hand, her gaze filled with love. "I think we've created something beautiful, Michael. Something that will last long after we're gone." They sat in peaceful silence, the warmth of their love surrounding them, knowing that they had lived a life worth living, a life filled with love, family, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Michael and Emily knew that their story would continue, passed down through their family as a reminder that love, forgiveness, and resilience could carry them through anything. Because in the end, they had found a love that truly endured, a love that had transformed them, shaped their family, and created a legacy that would shine bright for years to come. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey of love, forgiveness, and second chances, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the beauty in life's challenges. Don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more touching stories that explore the power of resilience and the strength of family.